I saw a dead person. I awakened to answer the phone and heard the voice of an older woman, a member of my small church in rural Oklahoma. "Pastor, he's dead," she exclaimed. "John's dead. Come help me." I hurried through the dark streets to her house. The man lay in the bed, pale, cold, and still. She explained he had gone to bed not feeling well, and when she checked some time later, he didn't respond. Now dead, with his spirit departed, he lay quiet as in sleep, but silent. As we waited for the police and mortuary workers to arrive, I formed a circle of prayer with that stunned woman and the deceased. One of my hands touched warm, moist flesh, while the other hand touched a hand that was cold and immobile. My prayer thanked God for his life and the promise of eternal life. An hour later, the body left the house, but we couldn't help but wonder, where was John now? Hey friends, I'm Larry Payne, and all of us experience the dark valley of grief. We may lose a loved one or a big dream that we've had, and it brings the sadness, confusion, and loneliness we know so well as grief. In this episode, I want to discuss some important aspects of grief that may be overlooked. In the second post, next week, I'll offer some ways of handling the grief experience to promote well-being. By doing a healthy work, we can grieve for good. The reality of death, the heartache of grief, and the mystery of the afterlife have puzzled humankind since the species began. Scientists believe the oldest art known depicts such questions. Found in caves more than 40,000 years old, some of these depict a hybrid animal-human creature who seems to hold the power of life and death. Humans of all ages have wondered about these questions of existence. As Professor Reza Aslan writes in his book, God, a Human History, undeniable is the religious belief that is so widespread it must be considered an elemental part of the human experience. We are homo religios in our existential striving towards transcendence. The Hebrew Bible, composed between 1000 and 400 BCE, describes belief in Sheol, the world of shadows, where all the dead exist, neither rewarded or punished, held in an undead state of separation from God and life. Modern citizens can only imagine how oppressive was the day-by-day burden of death that must have been so common in a world where the average life expectancy was less than 35 years. My questions of John's destiny, that cold night in the little Oklahoma town, were echoes from the dawn of history. What is grief? We use the word grief to name the complex of emotions that we feel when a loss occurs. In the immediate days after that loss, physical sensations sweep across our body, provoking muscle weakness, shortness of breath, tightening of the chest, and a hollowness in our stomach. Then we may think differently, not believing it's real or being so confused we can't remember things. We start interpreting ourselves differently, and we may feel anger or guilt or loneliness, sadness, or even just numbness. Our behaviors change as we may have no appetite, withdraw from others, and lash out with rage. Some may be comforted to read that Jesus experienced the darkness of grief. The scriptures describe him as troubled, standing at the grave of his friend Lazarus. The adjective conveys a physical shuddering of anger, anguish, and sorrow as Jesus sobbed in grief with his friends. As I left that new widow that night long ago, all of this and more was swirling in her mind. And most of us have felt this way. The shadow of grief and loss comes to every human heart. My experience of grief was the most intense when my father died in a car wreck. He was 75 years old, enjoying retirement and a loving marriage to his second wife. The news hit like a sudden explosion to reverberate in our family for years. I reacted stoically at first, working to get the family to the funeral, helping the children cope, and dealing with the unexpected demands of settling the estate. I recall long-term mixed feelings of intense loneliness from the missed conversations, guilt at the financial gain from the estate, and anxiety about my role within the extended family dynamics. Weeks later, I prepared a sermon with tears, yet when it came time to preach it, there was a release of positive emotion as I moved on. Each of us are going to experience grief in different ways. My clients sometimes want to compare their experience with others, asking, "What's normal?" Well, there is no normal when it comes to grief. Personality and culture, type of loss and relationships create an unpredictable vector. The one certainty is variety over time. A rape victim may have shame followed with boiling anger. A spouse may feel relief, soon to be replaced by depression, following the death of a partner who suffered with cancer. Each grief journey will be as unique as a fingerprint, while being as common as the sunset that brings night to every day. Joan Didion gave a rich insight from the depths of her own grief journey. In her book, A Year of Magical Thinking, she wrote, "Grief turns out to be a place none of us know until we reach it. We anticipate that someone close to us could die, but we do not look beyond the few days or weeks that immediately follow such an imagined death. We misconstrue the nature of even those few days or weeks. We might expect, if the death is sudden, to feel shock. We do not expect that shock to be obliterative, dislocating to both body and mind. We might expect that we'll be prostrate, inconsolable, crazy with loss. We do not expect to be literally crazy. Customers who believe their husband is about to return and need his shoes." A vital tool to raise awareness and honor our unique journey is a journal. A written page is all ears, waiting to hear what a grieving soul wants to share in the moment. The blank lines offer no judgment or demands. Tears or fears, hopes or moping days, all will find a place. Spending even a few minutes marks footprints on the trail that can be retraced later as a larger perspective is gained. The simple question, "What am I feeling today?" opens the gate for a path that is made by the walking through the valley of that dark shadow. Process Christian theology finds God on this path of grief. The Bible reveals God as a fellow sufferer. In several different passages, God is anguished at evil, groans with longing, and darkened with sorrow. These are expressions of the true experience of God, not just human imagination. We find a companion when we're swept into the swirl of grief, connecting with us in the deepest of all relationship. Theologian Thomas Ord summarizes what many believe as he says, God and creatures relate to each other. God makes a real difference in creation, and creation makes a real difference to God. God is relational. What a joy it is to know this companion never leaves our side, even in the experience of grief. As I conclude, let me just say that grief is not a mental illness. We don't need a cure from it. We need to work through it. And the mixture of darker emotions is uncomfortable, of course, yet they're like the dark tones of a beautiful painting, lending depth and richness to the art. We must embrace our grief and continue the journey through the valley of the shadow. So in part 2, I'm going to explore how we can do that in a healthy way. And I invite you to join me as we walk together and discover grief for good.